Every game is a playoff game, and yes, that means you, Purdue. These are snap judgments. It's a Woody Wednesday. That's Bill Landis. I'm Austin Moore. We mentioned it on Tuesday. Ryan Day talking about Purdue. The rest of the Buckeyes are treating the Boilermakers, talking about Purdue, talking about every opportunity in a way that's different than the first half of the season. I think that was worth mentioning on Tuesday, and it was reiterated on a Wednesday.
I thought Lathan Ransom put it well, right? Like in the grand scheme of things, beating Michigan, making the playoff, winning the national championship, the Big Ten championship is maybe the thing that will get brought up last by a lot of people, but it is still very much on the mind of this team, the collective mind of this team. And they know that if they drop another game, that they are off track to get back to Indianapolis, right? So, yeah, every game kind of is a playoff game if you look at it that way. And I think listen, you'd rather not lose to Oregon, right? But now that it has happened, they have an opportunity to kind of use that, I think, in a pretty tangible way to get them locked in on the rest of the season. And it seems like they are. Like, there was a pretty good vibe, I thought, after practice here on Wednesday night.
Yeah, I think it was a lot more enjoyable, and it gave us a lot more information and entertainment. Like, I don't even know where to begin. Normally, if you have a situation like Jeremiah Smith, for example, saying that he's not really met his own standards through the first 8 games when he has set the Ohio State freshman receiving records, and saying, just watch what could happen in the next 8 or 9 games. Like, whew, there's so much to unpack all at once. It's delightful, and it is refreshing and so different than the last Wednesday when we were in here.
Yeah, I mean, Ryan Day said that he senses a lot of confidence from this team. I think stemming from the entire game against Penn State, I thought was good. Miscue here, miscue there, but just kind of locked in, I think, the way you need to be in a big game. But then to finish it the way they did, goal line stand, running the ball down the other team's throat, like the physicality that it took to win the game that way, I think has helped this team maybe find out something about itself. And now they're trying to marry the confidence that comes from that with a little bit better execution. And Purdue is standing on the tracks. So we'll see what happens on Saturday. But yeah,
the light at the end of the tunnel.
The light at the end of the tunnel was a train. No, I think Jeremiah Smith saying that is crazy. I think a lot there's not a whole lot of resting on what happened last week, because there's been actually a decent amount of acknowledgement of yeah, we won, yeah, it was a huge win, we're happy we got it, we proved something to ourselves, but we can definitely play better than that, and that's what I think the focus is right now.
I think it's crazy that Jeremiah Smith means it, and it's also crazy that I think he's probably right, because he's talked about a few plays. He said there were plays against Nebraska that kept him from grading out as a champion, and that he was losing sleep over that. That he and receivers coach Brian Hartline are talking about the corrections that need to be made, and he still did not play a perfect game against Penn State. We talked about maybe the thought process for thinking the safety's so deep, there's no way Will Howard's going to throw that deep ball, and a little bit of miscommunication on that. But everyone keeps saying, once he learns something once, if he makes a mistake, it's not going to happen again. So if you see that continued growth from Jeremiah Smith with what he's already done, it's wild. That all those things can be true.
I guess so. I don't want to come off as saying I don't think he's been good enough, right? But if he thinks that's the case, then I guess we'll.
I don't mean it to come across.
Yeah,
that way
no,
either.
I know you don't. But just he's been awesome as a true freshman, and Ryan Day has said multiple times, he's not a freshman anymore, right? So maybe that's it, right? He is not a freshman anymore. So now it's time to take it to even another level. If he does, it'll be pretty crazy.
Yeah. So that was. I've been really looking forward to the next time that we got to talk to Jeremiah, because it had been a little while. We barely know him. He's one of the most impactful players in college football. So already, again, that's a mouthful as well. The way he approaches the game is so impressive. I wanted to make sure that I got that. So that was the place that I started with what I wanted to learn, was a little bit more about Jeremiah Smith. Well, where did you want to go first?
I wanted to get eyeballs on Tyleik Williams, who walked off the practice field looking like a guy who had at least done some stuff on Wednesday. He did have, it appeared, a fairly bulky brace on his left ankle that was kind of underneath the socks or whatever. But Ryan Day said that he looks like he's going to play this week. And then he was asked if Tyleik would be on a pitch count. Ryan Day, of course, said no. I think if the game gets to the point where he can be on a pitch count, he probably will, right? So, but I was worried about that. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have been worried about it being a little longer term thing, or if we'd even see him today, like walking off the field. So that we saw him was pretty encouraging, I think, no matter what happens this weekend.
Yep. Ty Hamilton and Kaden McDonald both talked after practice as well. This feels to me like, and I've said this since Saturday, really, that you don't need to push it with Tyleik Williams. Whether you want to put an actual snap count on it or whether you just want to get a quick hook once you get out there and maybe build a lead, maybe that's probably the way that it's best to approach it on a Wednesday for the coaching staff, for the training staff, for the medical folks, rather than send that message that you're only going to play 15 or 20 snaps or maybe even less against Purdue. Like that's probably a practical approach for them not to, but you have to lean on Ty Hamilton and more Kaden McDonald in this game, and maybe more Edric Houston with what we've seen at 3 technique. Hero Canoe was involved in the goal line stand on Saturday at Penn State as well. Like, Ohio State has a lot of depth at defensive tackle, probably more than it's actually played, because it views TNT as so explosive that they don't want to pull the plug on it.
TNT is explosive.
You don't pull the plug.
You don't want to pull the plug.
You just push the plunger.
You just push the plug. Yeah, that's right. I think, but it's interesting because I agree with everything you said, but I don't know that I would have like 4 weeks ago, right? That first stint when Tyleik didn't play, I thought that was a little like, man, are these young defensive tackles ready for this kind of thing? But then I think to be on the field for that moment against Penn State, and there had been stuff building prior to that, especially for Kaden McDonald, and even Edric Houston playing the little bit that he played against Nebraska, I thought was telling. So I think it's in a much better spot. This does feel like a game that, Ohio State's a 38-point favorite. Purdue's 1-8. That all things go well, you should see a lot of Kaden McDonald and Hero Canoe and Edric Houston and probably Jason Moore and Tywone Malone. Like, ideally, Ty Hamilton and Tyleik Williams are on the sideline sipping a virgin Mai Tai, while the game's happening.
And as much as it's pretty well documented, right, that I like watching Kaden McDonald play football, and I think we should get to do it more.
There were 2 people who were beaming when Kaden McDonald was out here. One was Kaden McDonald and one was you.
Yeah. I was really excited to talk to him. He was excited to be back out there. That guy loves football. But then the thing that I like just as much as watching him is like listening to him talk about football. This is paraphrasing, but he was being asked a lot about the stop and the third down play, pushing the center back. And he was like, yeah, I probably could have pushed him a little bit further. If you give me a one-on-one matchup against a center, I feel like nobody's going to block me. So
yeah,
that was just exciting.
He like almost made it sound like no big deal because he was like, I was a nose guard, head up on the center. It was a solo block. Like, I'm supposed to do that. But then it felt like he should have done more. I also thought it was interesting. He said like he was like thinking about like his mom and his brother. Was like, I got to make the play for them. And it's like, all right, what? I mean, great. It's great to have that internal motivation. But I also think it's interesting that even he's pretty inexperienced, right? To know, or like to find those different areas, I guess, to help push yourself to get to that next level in a moment like that, I thought was pretty impressive. So I'm glad he shared that. But yeah, he seemed borderline disappointed that he only drove the center back 3 yards instead of 6 yards. So maybe next time we can do 6.
Yeah. Boy, I can't wait to see what happens on bold predictions on Friday for Kaden McDonald. Could be outrageous. There was a player who was available tonight who didn't want to talk about some things at length. And I think I liked that just as much, which was Denzel Burke recounting Oregon. This is the first time that any of us had talked to him publicly since then. And he said, he didn't get the job done. Next question. And to me, that is like the most Denzel Burke answer that you could get. And I like it.
Yeah, I'm fine with it. Like, I guess he could go in the detail about it, but what's the detail? The guy ran behind me. Like, it's like we all
did
saw.
Say. I guess he did go into a little more detail, because people kept asking me. He said, "Well, it's team defense," and I think you can read into that whatever you want.
Yeah, I think I'm picking up what he's putting down there a little bit. Russian coverage kind of thing. But like, clearly he didn't get the job done. 8 targets, 8 completions. That is not, in my opinion, indicative of the player that he is. I just think he had a really bad day, and he owned it. That he didn't want to expound much further on that, I think is fine, as long as like it doesn't happen again, right? So I think that's far more important than anything Denzel Burke could have said is making sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and they're all about that, and I think we're going to see. I always want to make sure the game is not won on a Wednesday night. with the mentality. Certainly not one in a press conference, but whether we are good at psychoanalysts or not, like the energy around this team has changed dramatically. And coming off the practice field, I think you can get a sense of that confidence. Does it mean that they're going to cover, that they're going to blow the doors off Purdue from the first snap? I don't know. We're going to have to see.
Yeah.
But it does feel like the confidence of this team is very different than it has been. I think even in some ways before Oregon. Like and there's no way for me to prove that, know that, test that theory out, but they weren't really talking in the same. It was the internal stuff, like, oh, we can only measure ourselves against ourselves. Like, that's not. I don't know that that's the healthiest way forward for a team, because you have to win every game you play. Like, changing the focus, I think this week, which is, again, they did that after practice. Why I'm bringing it up again tonight, and putting it on Purdue and putting it on a playoff mindset.
Yeah,
I think that's a lot more beneficial than even when we do it from the outside. So, well, did that reach a championship standard? That's not, there's no way to know that. You can only play the team that's in front of you that week.
Yeah, no, I think moving the target a little bit can be good for the team. It's a long season, right? The messages, I'd imagine, grow stale at some point. If you're Ryan Day, you got to find new things to hit on, and it seems like he has this week. And I also we've covered Ohio State for a long time. We know what it's like when they get a big win, or like they're feeling happy about that win. But I think happiness and confidence aren't necessarily always the same thing. And this, more so than just like the joy of a big win, I feel the confidence more than anything else with this team. And it's not like a cockiness that they have everything figured out, because they also keep talking about the execution piece, Ryan Day in particular. But I wonder, even though it was a 1-point loss on the road to the now number one team in the country, and I don't think anybody who covers college football would argue whether or not Oregon deserves to be number one team in the country right now, maybe their confidence was shook a little bit. Maybe you do start you have all this build up and all these expectations on you, and then like their first like real test, you fall like a little bit short. And maybe it's human nature to wonder whether or not you actually have it, right? And maybe some of that lingered into the Nebraska game, even though it was 2 weeks later. And I think if that was the case, and I'm just kind of projecting, I think they probably got it back last week, and that's sort of what I feel. It's what I felt in the building this week.
It doesn't mean that they're happy about special teams, though. But that could be a whole nother show. And I don't know that anybody wants to hear me wrap up snap judgments talking about how the special teams has not performed. But Ryan Day did say, for the amount of time that they're putting into it, they're not getting the output. And
that's interesting. Must have been over with Seth McLaughlin or something.
Yeah, and that's about as stark of terms as you're ever going to hear him put it in. They said that the reason they're putting in that much time is to make special teams a plus for them, and it has not been a plus for them.
Did he say what was missing? Or what he thinks they could do better?
Not any great detail about that. He said they're tired of it being about one block or one cut or one other thing that they could do differently. It was primarily about the return game. He'd also been asked about Caleb Downs being out there, and they want to see him in the open field. They talked about kickoffs, some of them being just over their head and nothing you can do. But there wasn't a point that was like, oh, we could coach this differently, or that personnel needs to be different, because they feel really good about both Brandon Ennis and Caleb Downs. They think that there's opportunities on the kickoff game when they've tried other folks out there. Emeka has been involved. So I don't think it's that, but he did not give any great details about why, other than say, well, they did make a couple field goals last week, but that was sort of the extent of it.
One, before we wrap up, one area where they have put an emphasis on that is working is quarterback sneaks. I think they're averaging 3 yards per sneak this year. I was looking it up the other day. They've obviously had back-to-back weeks where they've had like monster quarterback sneaks from the one they get away from their own end zone. And Seth McLaughlin said like they drill it every Tuesday. They work on stuff. He said they were watching tape of the Eagles in the offseason, and Ohio State doesn't do with quite the same similar tush-push. I think they're watching more of what the offensive line does in those situations. And then I asked Ryan Day about it, and he said, like, I don't want to get into it. And then I talked to him on the side, and we got into it. So, I mean that in a good way. But he told me that in the offseason, he knocked me out. And then he told me in the offseason that they had Nate Ebner around. We saw him at camp one day,
did,
right? We're like, what's A-Number doing here? They were talking about rugby, and I think the correct term, he said scrums, but then one of our texters corrected me when I sent it out. I think it's a maul is what it's called in rugby, when like a guy has the ball and you're pushing him toward the goal, whatever, the touch line or whatever it's called in rugby. My apologies to any rugby heads out there.
This is a football
This is a football show. But they studied that a lot. They had Nate Edner come in and talk to them about the lineman getting low, about like almost like crawling to move the line forward. And I think that they've gotten a lot of really good results out of that. So I just thought that was an interesting detail, that something that they sort of went above and beyond to study, and now it is reaping benefits for them this season, clearly.
Well, and go Birds.
And go Birds. It's an excuse to talk about the Eagles, which I'll always take.
That's covering a lot of ground on a Woody Wednesday on Snap Judgments, and I'm glad that we did. It was more fun to talk about ball than vibes, although I like talking vibes too.
I like talking about good vibes.
Yeah. Especially when they're good.
Yeah.
But we'll also do it when they're bad, but they're not right now. So don't worry about that. That's the conclusion. He's Bill Landis. I'm Austin Worth. This has been a Woody Wednesday, some Snap Judgments. We'll be back. We got 3 things on the podcast daily on Thursday, some bold predictions on Friday. Bill's got 2 more, 3 more, probably 5 more shows that he's doing.
No, just a couple. Just Kings of the North on Thursday preview show. And then Saturday night, like always.
All right, stay tuned for all that as we get set for Ohio State against Purdue Saturday noon in the Horseshoe. Can't wait for it. He's Bill. I'm Austin. So long.